everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to do some more color mixing with Jacquard acid dyes. But instead of doing a red, blue, yellow, today we are going to look at a more cyan, magenta, yellow colorway to show some different ways that you can get different colors if you're starting with some of these brighter primary colors. The yellow that I'm using today is the same yellow I used in the previous exercise. Now, the triangle color mixing exercise is actually part of Knit Crate's new Dive into Dyeing course, a Learn to Dye course, a 3-month subscription that I actually collaborated with them on. And you can go and watch all of the videos that I created for this course now on the Dyer Supplier YouTube channel because they are available for everyone. So that way you can look at the tutorials before deciding if you're ready to dive in. If you would like to learn more about the course, you can find my affiliate link down in the video description. And if you are a new Knit Crate customer, you can save 20% off the first month of Dive into Dyeing using the coupon code ChemKnits20. You can find more details down below in the description. The goal of these color mixing exercises is to understand the relative potency between the different colors. So that way, if you want to create that perfect grass green, or if you want a purpley pink color, you know what ratio between 2 or 3 colors you might want to use to create your desired color. And this is a great way to start out, especially if you are going to start your acid dye collection with only a handful of colors. You can get by with, I guess my pick of 5 colors would be a blue, red, and yellow, a cyan, a magenta, and a black. Those are my top 6 colors. Now let's go and take a closer look at today's dyeing project. Our cyan, magenta, yellow combinations today are using Jacquard bright yellow, turquoise, and hot fuchsia. The specific exercise we'll be doing today is going to involve 15 different samples. In this triangle exercise, we will be looking at our yellow, our turquoise, and our fuchsia separately. But then we will be looking at combinations of each of the 2 primaries, in addition to some combinations of all 3 colors. Now you can expand this triangle further so you can have more mixtures featuring all 3, but starting with 15 is a really simple way to start understanding the relative intensity between these colors. What do I mean about the relative intensity? One of the goals of this project is that we're going to have the same amount of dye on each of our samples here. The equivalent of 1 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn. So, but what does this mean? Well, different colors are more or less intense than others. For example, 1 gram of an ivory dye powder is going to have a much more pastel final color than 1 gram of a black dye. And so that is where this comparison comes in. And when you want to play around with color mixing, it's helpful to understand, okay, our red is way more potent than our yellow. So if I want a good medium orange, I'm going to need a lot of yellow, but only a little bit of red. And that is what this exercise will really help us. The goal here isn't to create a perfect balanced rainbow. It is to understand what you would need to tweak if you wanted to go and create that balanced rainbow. So I hope that that helps. We are going to be dyeing all of these colors at a 1% depth of shade, which means that for each of the 10 gram mini skeins we have in our various containers, we will have 0.1 grams of dye, which gives us that 1% depth of shade. So to get started, let's go mix some 1% stock solutions of these 3 colors. For each of our stock solutions, I weighed out 5 grams of the dry dye powder and then slowly dissolved it into some hot tap water to create a final volume of 500 milliliters. This would give us our 1% stock, which is 1 gram of dye and 100 milliliters of final liquid. For a color mixing exercise like this, I really want to mix up the dyes fresh. So that way there's not any time for dyes to crash out of solution. This will give us the most accurate results if we want to try to reproduce any of the 15 mixtures we see in a future project. Make sure that whenever you are dealing with dry dye powder, you are wearing personal safety equipment. I am wearing a P100 respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves, while I am making these stocks. But as soon as I have the dye in liquid, I take the mask off and continue mixing until everything is well dissolved. Of the three colors, the fuchsia dissolved really easily into our hot tap water. The yellow and blue gloved up, the yellow being a little more cottage cheese-like and the blue really clumping. So it required a bit more stirring or even rubbing your utensil against the side of the container. Just be patient, and even if you need to let it sit and wait for a little bit before stirring some more, eventually it will dissolve. And it did dissolve for me. And so then you can transfer your dye stock into some storage containers. And don't forget to label the containers with the date, the color name, and the concentration. So that way you can remember what they are on a later date. For each of our samples, we are going to dye 10 grams of yarn. And the base we're using today is Wool to Dyefor's Platinum Stock, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. I pre-soaked all of the yarn in some plain tap water for about 30 minutes. I set up 15 takeout containers and added 1 cup of cool tap water with no acid to each of them. I used some graduated syringes to accurately measure out the color. We also aliquoted the stocks to make this easier. I added 10 milliliters of dye total to each of the containers to give us that 1% depth of shade of all of the colors. It is easiest to do this when you start at a corner with your 10 milliliters, and then as you go further and further out of each color, you add 7.5, then 5, then 2.5, and then 0. And doing this starting at each corner for each of the 3 primary colors is a really organized way to go about it, and before you know, all of the color is in the containers. As I start looking at these colors, the blue and the pink still seem to dominate our colorways. I definitely see some purples in here, like that midpoint that is looking fairly purple. That one's looking a little more pink. And we've got some good intermediates, what might be reds or oranges here. Yeah, but definitely the yellow is not more dominant when we're dealing with the pink and that blue. But the colors that we see in each of these combinations should be different than what we did in the last exercise. And so that is what will be really fun. The difference might be more subtle. Like I think this time the blue is a bit more dominant than the pink, but it'll be a little easier to see once we add our pre-soaked yarn. I gently squeezed out the pre-soaked water from our 10-gram mini skeins and then one at a time added them to the various colors that we had mixed. There is still no acid in our containers, and I like to add the acid next because this also will help us get more even color coverage on our mini skeins. At this stage, I'm gonna let everything sit for at least an hour before we come and add our acid, just to give a little bit of time for the color to soak in with the yarn so we can end up with more even colors than if we added the acid a lot faster. These colors are beautiful. I would say that the yellow is the least dominant, the least potent of our 3 primaries here. But looking at the triangle, it looks like we have an outer V and then an inner little triangle here. I really think that either the blue is slightly the most intense, or the blue and pink are both pretty intense, and we've got some good matchups in here. But actually, maybe the blue is our dominant friend here. What is fun is that we've got our bright turquoise with a little bit of pink. We've got more of a deep blue. And similarly in here, if we add a little bit of yellow to the pink, we end up with something more red feeling. And so that is really fun when it comes to the mixing as well. But poor yellow. If you want like a yellow green or a really yellow orange, you're just gonna need a lot more of it proportionally. And so again, you can expand your triangle bigger to look at more variations between 2 colors. And you could do this with non-primaries as well. But I think that having that white yarn in there really does make the colors pop a bit. And I think that these ones are really, really pretty. But I'm very excited to compare this finished yarn with the yarn we did in our first ever triangle exercise. Now that it's been about an hour, we are going to add some acid. And this is just some white vinegar, and I'm adding 1 teaspoon of white vinegar to each of these containers. Now, in theory, this should be plenty of acid for these colors to absorb in a cool vat technique. What I don't know is if the fuchsia, which I believe is fluorescent, it might need a little more heat and potentially a little more acid. So we'll see how this works after a few days, if we need to then add a little more heat. But I'm just going to quickly stir things up. I do wipe off the spoon when I'm going into a completely different color out of one of the gradients. But there's not that much pigment on the spoon. And I think that these colors are wonderful. Now, another thing that you could do if you want to make sure you have plenty of, if you want things to be as solid, ooh, that color is pretty. If you want there to be a lot more solid color on these minis, you could increase the volume of water in these cups. But I am not that worried today, and I don't mind some variation. But it seems to me that our blues are striking a little bit already and that the pinks aren't yet. But that is just my initial assessment. We will be able to see if there's any breaking later on after the yarn has, or after the color has absorbed to the yarn. I could go ahead and heat set all of these right away, but one thing I really enjoy taking advantage of when it comes to these color mixing videos is letting the colors cool or sort of absorb slowly and using a room temperature or cool vat in order to do that. And if you have the time to wait, then this is a really, really awesome little technique that just involves some patience. And it's really handy if you want to look at multiple samples at a time. So, for example, if I wanted to immersion set each of these colors on my stovetop, I could only do really 2 or 3 at a time. Maybe I could do up to 5 if I put it into mason jars. But that just takes time. And so instead, I can let this sit overnight and then we can steam set them potentially all together if the colors absorb as well as they have with other color combinations. But the pink is a tiny bit of a wild card. So we'll wait for a couple days. I have all these lids labeled 1 through 15, so I can easily get them back in the same order. Each color is distinct, but some of like the greens and some of these red and orange colors are a little similar. But we'll come back in probably a little over a day. It's been a little over a week due to some life circumstances, but it's time to finally open these up. And honestly, that's a perk of cool vat dyeing. You can wait a little more time if needed, and that doesn't hurt anything we have here. But we do want to steam set the yarn just to make sure the colors are completely set. But let's go look and see how clear the water is. Opening this up, I'm really impressed with the balance that I see. I think that the blue is dominating the other colors a bit still, but I guess the red did last time with Jacquard, so this really isn't bad. And the balance, I feel oranges in here, I feel purples, I feel greens. Yeah, the midpoint, this is a little blue. This is still a bit red, and the midpoint here is actually a really great medium green, although maybe that should be the more midpoint. I'm not sure. Maybe I guess if I was going to call things a midpoint, I would sort of call this orange, this green, and that purple there. So we're definitely blue dominated, but I am happy with the balance that we see. And I think that it wouldn't take a lot of tweaking to create a really fun rainbow gradient with these 3 colors. Now, if we look at our mixtures of 3 colors, they are all very green. The one that surprised me the most, however, is not that these two are pretty green. Those have the least amount of red. It's that this skein right here is still a little bit green. I actually see some breaking in here. I see some green, I see some blue, and I see little bits of pink. It's very, very beautiful, but it's amazing that this is the most pink. So that green really, really is dominating. But one other thing to point out, I do see a hint, a tiny hint of pink here. But now for the moment of truth. Again, we waited a lot longer than I had intended. There might be a hair of pink in here, but not enough that I think that that would cause necessarily any color transfer. For steaming, I might separate these into two batches. The blue, there could be a tiny hint. The yellow is fine. I mean, the amount of color left is so minimal that it's basically clear. But I do think, there's enough space in the steam pan. I think I'll group them like this for the steamer basket. So why are we steam setting the yarn if we went through the trouble of having this cool vat, sort of just letting the yarn sit in with the dye for, a little over a week, which again was longer than we intended. But still, they had that time to sit and for the colors to absorb, but we just want to make sure that the colors are well set and that they're not going to run. The long time scale allows the colors to absorb slowly enough so that way we can get more semi-solid colors all at once. So this kind of setup would allow me to set up a massive 50 skein triangle or something similar. And so I think now that we've looked at Jacquard in two different triangles, and we will compare all these colors to each other, but now that we've looked at all of these colors of Jacquard, I think one of the next acid dye things I'd like to try would be a much bigger triangle. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. We've tried this out with food coloring. I could also do this with Dharma acid dyes. I have Greener Shades acid dyes. I could get some other brands as well. And I guess the other thing that we could do, I have fiber reactive dyes. I absolutely want to try this with fiber reactive dyes. But yeah, I guess let me know if you guys would like to see me keep doing this. Because I enjoy doing it and I'd like to do more, but I don't want the videos to get too repetitive. But who would have thought that these containers would get so much use? The only regret that I have with this project is I wish I had the exact same yarn base that I used the very first time I did the color mixing, so that way I could easily compare these together. But we do have that same yellow, and so we will look at the triangles side by side at our conclusions. But now I'm going to go steam set these on the stovetop for 30 minutes, let them cool completely so we can wash our yarn. Let's wash our yarn. I am using cool tap water. The yarn has cooled completely. And we're gonna claw off our fingers when it comes to color bleeding today. I'm not expecting any, but neon and fluorescent colors can be a little tricky. But actually, I'm not seeing any color come out, which is perfect. I just always hold my breath a bit more with those. I'm using just some dish soap to rinse the yarn out. Rinsing that off my hands. And once again, I'm not expecting to see any color come out. Voila! If you do see some color bleeding or color running off, you're going to want to rinse it longer. And you may want to soak with some acid and steam set one more time. It's important with certain colors to not use too much dye, or else you might get a bleeding monster. But anyway, I am going to rinse out the soap, put all the yarn through my spin dryer, and then hang it up to dry so we can come take a final look at the colors once they're dry. But I love the brightness we have here. Here is the finished dry yarn. And first impressions, I'm feeling a lot of duality. I feel bright, vibrant, almost neon colors in a lot of the orange and the blue and the yellow. And then also, and these are likely from our combination of all three colors, some really beautiful muted tones. So let's go take a closer look at our triangle. I just wanted to point out I did get a little bit of color transfer in a very, very subtle way that is almost hard to notice, but it is present. So if that's something that you're concerned about, I would probably heat set the yellows separately. Seeing a little bit of specks of some color transfer on the pink as well. I wonder if maybe there was just a little bit of blue powder that wasn't dissolved, because the transfer is very speckled. So again, it's very subtle, but this is not something that I observed with the other three primary colors. So it's just worth pointing out. Let's start with just our three primaries here. We've got our true turquoise, our bright yellow, and our hot fuchsia. These are all very, very bright. The yellow isn't necessarily neon, but it works with the brightness of these colors. And I guess the blue isn't technically that neon either, but the pink is, I believe it's fluorescent. Too bad I lost my black light. I do want to point out that I'm not positive that the fuchsia and turquoise are technically primaries. Now, I think in the way that you're talking about colors, you could think of them that way, but there is a possibility that there is some mixture of different dye molecules in here. I don't remember if Jacquard actually lists them as a primary. So I just wanted to point that out. But looking at it this way, there's a reasonable balance. I mean, this looks very orange. It's nice and bright. This, I think, as we'll see when we expand more, this is a very bluish purple. And the green is a nice green as well. But let's expand a little bit more. There are a few things that I want to point out, specifically with our pink combinations. When we have a lot of blue, the turquoise and a little bit of pink, this looks like a blue. It looks like a primary blue. This, with just the pink and a tiny bit of yellow, looks very red versus being orange. And so that's just interesting from a color mixing perspective, and why some people might say that starting with a cyan, magenta, and yellow is a better spot to start with in terms of color mixing, because you can create more colors. I still would recommend having, I guess, a true blue and a true red in your collection as well, which is why those are 5 of the colors that I really, really wanted in the Dive into Dyeing kit. But yeah, I just think that it's just interesting. Here is our triangle completed, and our 3 colors here definitely lean green. This color that was 2 parts pink, 1 part yellow, 1 part blue is really interesting to me. There are definitely some pink elements, some broken, but it's a very dusty, almost grayish color compared to feeling brown. And so that, I don't know, is very intriguing. It is actually a slightly on the green edge, but it was really interesting to me how the pink didn't really make a very big impact with these other colors. And I'm so used to pinks feeling fairly dominant. I guess blues can be dominant sometimes, but that just was interesting how the yellow and blue edge really seemed to actually have a really big impact today. Here we have our true triangles. In this other one right here, we have our fire red and our brilliant blue. And so immediately there are some differences here. Using the turquoise and fuchsia, we have a lot more brights in with our mixtures. A lot of our mixtures over here feel more jewel toned and muted. The other thing to note is that the yellow and pink balance feels closer together over here, because right here you feel the subtle shift away from the red, and then bam, there's the yellow. And so while there's like a good match between the 3 in the middle, it feels like these are more intermediate in each of the cases. When looking at the bright yellow, fire red, and brilliant blue, the fire red dominates by far. Everything that has red in it, you feel that red in there, and all of these colors feel fairly similar. I think we've got a little more balance when we have the turquoise and the hot fuchsia, but I would say over here, the blue does dominate a little bit more. Like the three, specifically looking at the three colors in the middle, they do lean more blue and green, whereas these three do lean more red. The goal of this project is, again, not to create a perfect rainbow, but it teaches you what the relative intensities of the colors are. So then if you want to go and create a really bright orange, you know the ratio of colors that you need to do that, versus trying to start with a 50-50 mix and then getting something that feels too red and wondering, how should I go about fixing it? And so this is why this is a project or an exercise that is worth trying with whatever brand of dye or type of dye you're using, just to get that initial feel. And again, we can extend these triangles and make them a lot bigger. So if that is something that you would like to see, let me know in the comments below. We could add more rows to expand the mixing that we have, and to see specifically expand on these colors that are a mixture of all three. My other goal here is to demonstrate that you don't need to have all 40 Jacquard acid dyes. You don't need to go and buy all, 60, 80 colors that Dharma offers. You can really get by with just a few pre-mixed colors. And so these five, the yellow and the two blues and the red and the pink, can get you really far with a lot of colors that you want. I also recommend that you have a black, maybe a gray, maybe a brown, but otherwise these five plus black, those would be the 6 colors that I recommend that you buy first. Whether it's Jacquard or a different brand, these types of colors is what I mean. Now that we're looking at our full triangle, do you see what I mean? How this color really is fairly blue? It's a blurple, but it is definitely not a mid purple. Like this one feels like it belongs more in the center of that pink and blue. And the same thing up here. This is an orange, but it definitely feels more red once you compare it to this orange right here. The green actually feels like a reasonable midpoint between the blue and yellow. So if I was going to design a rainbow out of this, I would probably go pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And that would be the rainbow that I would pull out of our triangle. And so therefore those are the recipes that I would use to mix those colors. I really enjoy these triangle color mixing videos, and honestly, this is not the last one that's going to come out in 2020. There will actually be another one sometime in December using Colorite food coloring. I think one of the reasons why I love these so much is that I don't consider color mixing to be a strength of mine. I don't have an innate sense of what colors to mix together to get a color I want, and this helps me so much. There have been so many times when I'm like, okay, I want to fade yellow into blue, and then I do this and I'm like, why am I not getting that, like, what is off with my calculations? And so going back and being able to refer to these videos and these types of swatches is just a really great place, because I know, okay, if I want with these 3 colors to get a really good teal, I'm going to need a lot more blue than this 3-to-1 color right here. Or if I want, a very pink purple, again, I'm going to need more than 3 pink to 1, 3 fuchsia to 1 turquoise. It is so fun to see the difference in the brightness of the colors that we got today versus when we did this exercise looking at just red, blue, and yellow. And it's really cool that you can get a nice blue, very similar to our primary blue, by mixing the true turquoise and hot fuchsia. Once again, if you are only going to get 6 colors of acid dyes to start with, I recommend that you get a primary yellow, red, blue and a cyan and magenta. And for a sixth color, I would say get a good black, because with those 6 colors, you can mix just about anything you want. And if you're gonna play around with color mixing, this is a really handy swatch reference to have on hand. And doing something like this, or even just in between 2 different colors, is so helpful before you go and dye a sweater quantity's worth of yarn and then decide, oh, that's not the color that I wanted. The Dive into Dyeing course at Knit Crate is currently sold out, but it is an evergreen subscription, and they will be re-releasing more slots as soon as they can. And again, if you would like to learn more about it, I do have an affiliate link down in the video description, and I will also be linking to the Dive into Dyeing playlist that I made, where you can see all the videos and watch my unboxings as I go through in detail what you will get in each of the 3 boxes. It was so much fun for me to work on the Dive into Dyeing project and to create these videos, and having these booklets that are written tutorials based on my videos with screen grabs from my videos is so fun and exciting to see, and these are just an amazing resource. Now for some ChemKnits news. I just released a few more 2020 ChemKnits Chanukah samplers in my Etsy shop. These samplers will have 10 wrapped packages that each contain a 10-gram mini skein for you to unbox while watching a new dyeing video. That's right, every evening of Chanukah plus a few nights after, there will be a new yarn dyeing video as bonus content in addition to my regularly scheduled programming. And it's so much fun for everyone to just enjoy. If you missed out on last year's sampler, there is still a chance to get some of the 2019 mini skeins from last year's Chanukah special. I have some just one night packages here that have a wrapped 10-gram mini skein in either fingering weight sock or DK weight yarn, and it also comes with 2 stitch markers, and so that is also available in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop, and I will link to everything down in the video description. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope that you found this video helpful. I love color mixing, and I am more than willing to explore this with other brands, or there's no reason why we have to do this with primary colors. We could pick some more muted red, blue, and yellow, or even pick 3 unrelated colors and mix them together to see what we can create. So let me know down in the comments if there's anything you would like to see moving forward. Thank you so much for watching.